What I'm about to tell you will challenge everything you think you know about genetics, family secrets, and the dark truths that DNA can reveal. 8 months ago, I was just another curious person who decided to spit in a tube and send it off to a genealogy company, hoping to learn more about my ancestry. I never imagined that simple act would connect me to a brutal murder that happened 8 years before I was even born, and ultimately uncover a family conspiracy that had been carefully hidden for decades. My name is Sarah, and until recently, I thought I knew exactly who I was. 28 years old, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, to loving parents who had always been completely open about my adoption. They told me they had adopted me when I was just 6 months old through a private agency, and that my birth parents had been young college students who weren't ready for a child. It was a story I had accepted my entire life, never questioning the details, never pushing for more information. My adoptive parents, Michael and Linda Chen, had given me everything I could have asked for, and I felt no burning need to dig into my biological past. But curiosity has a way of getting the better of us, doesn't it? Last Christmas, my best friend gifted me one of those popular DNA testing kits, the kind you see advertised everywhere, promising to unlock the secrets of your heritage. Just for fun, she said, to see where you really come from. I laughed it off initially, but the kit sat on my kitchen counter for weeks, taunting me with possibilities. What harm could it do? I was already 28, settled in my life, secure in my identity. A little genetic exploration seemed harmless enough. I followed the simple instructions, registered my kit online, and mailed it off on a Tuesday morning in February. The website promised results in 6 to 8 weeks, and honestly, I forgot about it almost immediately. Life got busy with work deadlines and relationship drama, and the DNA test became just another forgotten impulse purchase. When the email notification finally arrived in my inbox 7 weeks later, I almost deleted it thinking it was spam, but I clicked it. And that single click changed everything. The results themselves were initially unremarkable, mostly Northern European, some Scandinavian, a small percentage of Eastern European heritage. Nothing surprising there, but it was the family connection section that made my blood run cold. According to the database, I had a close genetic match with someone named Rebecca Martinez, listed as a potential aunt or first cousin. The profile was sparse, just a name, and the note that this person had also taken the test 3 months earlier. I stared at that name for what felt like hours. Rebecca Martinez. It meant nothing to me, but something about it felt significant in a way I couldn't explain. My adoptive parents had never mentioned any relatives, and the adoption agency had assured them that all family connections had been severed. So who was Rebecca Martinez, and why was our DNA so closely matched? I decided to reach out through the platform's messaging system. My message was simple and polite. Hi Rebecca, it looks like we might be related. I was adopted as a baby and don't know much about my biological family. Would you be willing to share any information you might have? I hit send without really expecting a response. Most people on these platforms are just casual users looking for fun facts about their ancestry. But Rebecca responded within hours, and her message made my heart race. Sarah, I've been looking for you for over 15 years. We need to talk. This is about more than just family history. There are things you need to know about why you were given up for adoption, and they're not what you think. Can you call me? It's urgent. 15 years. She had been looking for me for 15 years. I was 28, which meant she had started searching when I was just 13. Why? What could be so urgent about an adoption that happened nearly 3 decades ago? My hands were shaking as I typed my phone number and sent it to her. Within minutes, my phone was ringing. Rebecca's voice was gentle, but carried an undertone of urgency that immediately put me on edge. She explained that she was indeed my biological aunt, my birth mother's sister, and that she had been trying to track me down since I was a teenager. But the reason why left me speechless. My birth mother, her sister Maria, hadn't been a college student who gave me up because she was too young. She had been murdered when I was 4 months old, and I had been placed in protective custody before being put up for adoption. Murdered? I whispered into the phone, my voice barely audible, but that's impossible. My parents told me she was alive, that she just couldn't take care of me. Rebecca's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, she spoke. Sarah, your birth mother was killed in her apartment in Denver, Colorado, on September 15, 1987. You were found 3 days later when a neighbor called about the smell. You were dehydrated and malnourished, but alive. The case was never solved. September 15, 1987. I was born in January 1995. The math didn't add up, and I told Rebecca as much. There was another long pause before she delivered the bombshell that would completely shatter my understanding of my own identity. Sarah, you weren't born in 1995. You were born on May 3rd, 1987. Your real name is Isabella Maria Santos. You're 36 years old, not 28. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. 36. I was 36 years old. 8 years of my life had been erased. My identity completely rewritten. But how was that even possible? I had birth certificates, school records, medical files, all documenting a life that began in 1995. How could 8 years just disappear? Rebecca was still talking when I picked up the phone. Her voice urgent and frightened. Sarah or Isabella, I don't know what to call you anymore, but you need to understand something. Your mother's murder wasn't random. She had been receiving threats for months before she died. She was involved with some very dangerous people who might still be looking for you. The adoption, the new identity. It wasn't just about finding you a good home. It was about keeping you safe. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Dangerous people, threats, murder. This sounded like something from a crime thriller, not the mundane suburban life I had always known. I demanded proof, documentation, anything that could verify this impossible story. Rebecca promised to send me everything she had collected over the years, including police reports, newspaper clippings, and copies of official documents that would prove who I really was. The package arrived 3 days later via overnight express, and its contents turned my world upside down. There were police photographs I couldn't bear to look at, witness statements describing the brutal nature of my mother's death, and most shocking of all, a birth certificate with my real name, Isabella Maria Santos, born May 3rd, 1987, in Denver, Colorado. The document was official, bearing all the proper seals and signatures, and it was 8 years older than the birth certificate I had grown up with. But it was the crime scene report that truly terrified me. My mother had been tortured before she was killed, and the police suspected she had been forced to give up information about something or someone important to her attackers. The apartment had been ransacked, and several items were missing, including a safe that neighbors had seen being carried out by unknown individuals after the murder. The case had gone cold within 6 months due to lack of evidence and witnesses too frightened to come forward. As I read through the documents, one detail jumped out at me repeatedly. DNA evidence had been collected from the crime scene, but it had never been entered into any database due to the technological limitations of 1987. The samples had been preserved, however, and according to a notation from 1995, they were still being held in the Denver Police Department's evidence storage facility. That's when the most chilling realization hit me. When I had submitted my DNA to the genealogy company, it hadn't just been compared to other users' samples. These companies routinely share their databases with law enforcement agencies to help solve cold cases. My DNA had likely been run against thousands of unsolved crimes, including my mother's murder from 1987. I called Rebecca back immediately, my voice shaking with fear and confusion. Rebecca, I think my DNA test might have connected me to my mother's murder case. What if the police contact me? What if the people who killed her find out I'm still alive? Rebecca's response was not what I expected. Sarah, that's exactly what I was hoping would happen. I've been in contact with Detective James Morrison in Denver for years, begging him to reopen Maria's case. When he called me last week to tell me that a DNA match had come up in their system, I knew it had to be you. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. The DNA they found at the crime scene didn't just belong to your mother's killer. They found multiple samples, and one of them might be from someone you know. Someone I know. The words echoed in my mind as I tried to process their implications. How could someone I know be connected to a murder that happened when I was supposedly 8 years old? Unless I wasn't 8 years old. Unless I had been 4 months old, lying in a crib while my mother was being tortured and murdered in the next room. Detective Morrison called me the next morning. His voice was professional but kind, and he explained that my DNA sample had indeed matched evidence from the 1987 murder of Maria Santos. He needed me to come to Denver to provide an official DNA sample and to answer questions about what I might remember from that time. Remember, I was 4 months old. What could I possibly remember? But as I made plans to travel to Denver, something strange started happening. I began having vivid, disturbing dreams that felt more like memories than products of my imagination. I would wake up with the sound of screaming echoing in my ears, or with the inexplicable feeling that I was in danger. Were these real memories surfacing from my infancy, or was my mind playing tricks on me based on the traumatic information I had just learned? The flight to Denver was the longest 3 hours of my life. I was stared out the window, trying to reconcile the person I had always believed myself to be with this new identity that had been thrust upon me. Isabella Maria Santos, survivor of a brutal murder, hidden away for decades under a false identity. It sounded insane, but the documentation Rebecca had provided was undeniable. Detective Morrison met me at the airport, and I was struck by how tired he looked. This was clearly a case that had haunted him for decades. During the drive to the police station, he filled me in on details that hadn't been in the reports Rebecca had shown me. The murder had been particularly brutal, suggesting either a personal motive or an attempt to extract information. My mother had been bound and gagged, and the torture had gone on for hours. The neighbors who eventually called police reported hearing screaming intermittently throughout the night. The thing that always bothered me about this case, Detective Morrison said as we pulled into the station parking lot, was that nothing made sense about Maria Santos. She had no criminal record, no known enemies, no involvement in drugs or any other illegal activities. She was a 22-year-old single mother working 2 jobs to support her baby. There was no reason for anyone to want her dead, and certainly no reason to torture her for information. But as he led me through the police station, Detective Morrison revealed the detail that would change everything. Until we got your DNA match, last week we had been operating under the assumption that the baby found at the scene was Maria's biological child. But your DNA test results show something different. I stopped walking, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. What do you mean, she wasn't my mother? Rebecca said she was her sister. Detective Morrison turned to face me, his expression grave. Sarah, the DNA evidence shows that you're not related to Maria Santos at all. You were found at the scene of her murder, but she wasn't your mother, which means someone placed you there either before or after she was killed. And that changes everything about this case. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If Maria Santos wasn't my mother, then who was? And why was I, a 4-month-old baby, at the scene of her murder? Had I been kidnapped? Was I a witness to something even more sinister than I had imagined? The questions multiplied faster than I could process them. Detective Morrison led me to a small conference room where he had laid out decades of evidence from the case. Crime scene photos, witness statements, and forensic reports covered every surface. But it was the DNA analysis from my recent test that dominated the discussion. According to the laboratory results, my DNA showed no genetic relationship to Maria Santos, but it did match several other samples found at the crime scene. We found DNA from at least 4 different people in that apartment, Detective Morrison explained, pointing to various evidence bags, Maria's, of course, and yours from items like clothing and baby bottles. But we also found DNA from two unknown individuals, one on Maria's body and one on items that had been moved around the apartment. We think one belongs to the killer, and the other might belong to an accomplice. He pulled out a photograph of the crime scene that I had to force myself to look at. The apartment was small and modest, but it had been completely destroyed. Furniture was overturned, drawers emptied, walls damaged as if someone had been searching for something specific. In the corner of one photo, I could see a baby crib, and the sight of it made my stomach lurch. You were found in that crib, Detective Morrison said gently. Whoever killed Maria left you alive, which suggests either mercy or a very specific plan. But Sarah, here's what's been keeping me awake at night for 36 years. The crib wasn't originally in that apartment. According to the landlord and several neighbors, Maria Santos didn't have a baby. She lived alone, and no one had ever seen her with a child. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself as the full horror of the situation became clear. I hadn't just been present at a murder scene. I had been placed there deliberately. Someone had brought me to Maria Santos's apartment, either before or after her death, and then left me to be found by police. But why? What could possibly be the motive for such an elaborate setup? Detective Morrison continued. We've been working with the FBI on this case since last week, when your DNA results came in. The Bureau has been investigating a series of similar murders from the 1980s, all involving young women who were tortured and killed in their homes, with evidence of someone searching for something specific. Your case fits the pattern, but you're the first survivor we found. A serial killer. The words hung in the air between us like a death sentence. I wasn't just connected to one murder, I was potentially connected to a series of killings that had terrorized multiple cities in the 1980s. And somehow I had been at the center of it all as a 4-month-old baby. Detective Morrison, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Who am I really? If Maria Santos wasn't my mother, and I was placed at the scene of her murder, then where did I come from? Who are my real parents? He reached across the table and pulled out another evidence bag, this one containing what appeared to be a small piece of jewelry. We found this pin to your clothing when you were discovered. It's a locket. And inside there's a photograph of a woman who isn't Maria Santos. We think this might be your real mother. The locket was tarnished and small, clearly old even in 1987. Detective Morrison opened it carefully, revealing a tiny black and white photograph of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes. She looked to be in her early 20s, and there was something about her expression that seemed familiar, though I couldn't place it. We've never been able to identify this woman, Detective Morrison continued. But now that we have your DNA, we might be able to find her through genealogical databases. The thing is, Sarah, if this woman is your mother and you were taken from her and placed at Maria Santos's murder scene, then we're not just dealing with a random killing, we're dealing with something much more complex. As I stared at the photograph, trying to find some recognition in the woman's face, Detective Morrison dropped another bombshell. There's something else. To DNA we found at the scene that doesn't belong to you, Maria, or the unknown suspects. It matches someone in the system, someone who was arrested just last month in Portland, Oregon. Portland, my home city, the place where I had lived my entire remembered life. Who? I asked, though I was terrified of the answer. Detective Morrison hesitated before responding. Sarah, the DNA belongs to Michael Chen, your adoptive father. The words hit me like a physical assault. Michael Chen, the man who had raised me, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework, who had been at every school play and graduation. The man I called Dad had been at the scene of a brutal murder 8 years before he supposedly adopted me. That's impossible, I said, my voice rising. My father would never hurt anyone. There has to be some mistake. Maybe the samples were contaminated. Or maybe But Detective Morrison was shaking his head. Sarah, we ran the test 3 times. It's a perfect match. Michael Chen's DNA was found on items in Maria Santos's apartment, including on the crib where you were discovered. He was there, and based on the evidence, he was there around the time of the murder. My mind raced through the implications. Had my adoptive father killed Maria Santos? Had he been involved in my kidnapping? Was my entire life built on lies and violence? The man who had tucked me into bed every night for 28 years, who had taught me right from wrong, who had shown me nothing but love and support, was connected to a murder that had haunted police for decades. We need to bring him in for questioning, Detective Morrison said. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. If Michael Chen was involved in this crime, and if he's been raising you for all these years, you could be in danger. We don't know what his motivations were, and we don't know if those motivations have changed. In danger. From my own father, the thought was so surreal that I couldn't process it. But as I sat in that police station conference room, surrounded by evidence of a brutal murder and the revelation that my entire identity was a lie, nothing seemed impossible anymore. Detective Morrison arranged for me to stay in a hotel that night under police protection while they prepared to arrest Michael Chen. I called Rebecca from my room, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what I had learned. She listened in stunned silence before revealing another piece of the puzzle that made everything even more confusing. Sarah, I need to tell you something I should have mentioned before. When I started looking for you 15 years ago, I hired a private investigator. He traced your adoption records and found that they had been falsified. The adoption agency that supposedly handled your placement doesn't exist. It never existed. Michael and Linda Chen didn't adopt you through legal channels. They got you some other way. Some other way. The phrase echoed in my mind as I tried to understand how 2 seemingly normal people could end up with a kidnapped baby. Were they part of the conspiracy that had led to Maria Santos's murder? Had they known all along that I was stolen from my real family? The questions multiplied exponentially, each one more terrifying than the last. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about all the moments of my childhood that now seemed sinister in retrospect. Had my parents been watching me all those years, waiting for something? Had they been afraid I would remember something about that night in 1987? Was that why they had created such an elaborate false identity, complete with fake birth certificates and medical records? The next morning, Detective Morrison called to inform me that Michael Chen had been arrested at his home in Portland. Linda Chen had been taken in for questioning as well, though she hadn't been charged with anything yet. The arrest had made local news, described as a cold case breakthrough in a decades-old murder investigation. Sarah, Detective Morrison said over the phone, Michael Chen has agreed to talk to us, but he's asking to speak with you first. He says he can explain everything, but only to you. I need you to understand that this could be dangerous. We don't know what his motivations are or what he might say to you. But I needed answers. I needed to understand how the man who had raised me could be connected to such violence. And I needed to know who I really was. Detective Morrison arranged for the conversation to take place at the Denver Police Department with full recording equipment and multiple officers present for my protection. Michael Chen looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer and his face more lined with worry. But when he saw me walk into the interrogation room, his expression was one of pure relief mixed with devastating sadness. Sarah, he said, his voice breaking. I've been dreading this day for 28 years. 28 years, even in his confession, he was acknowledging that he had known the truth about my age all along. I sat across from him, separated by a metal table that felt like an ocean of lies and deception. Who am I? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Michael Chen took a deep breath before beginning a story that would finally explain the nightmare my life had become. Your real name is Isabella Rose Morrison. You were born on May 3rd, 1987, in Sacramento, California. Your mother was Jennifer Morrison, and she was my sister. Morrison, the same last name as Detective Morrison. The pieces of a horrifying puzzle began clicking into place. Your mother, Jennifer, was my younger sister, and she was in trouble with some very bad people. She had gotten involved with a man who turned out to be connected to organized crime, and when she tried to leave him, he threatened to kill both her and you. She went into hiding, but somehow he found her. Michael's voice was thick with tears as he continued. Jennifer called me the night she was killed. She was terrified, said that men were coming for her and that she needed me to take you somewhere safe. She gave me an address in Denver and told me to take you to a woman named Maria Santos, someone who helped hide people from dangerous situations. But when I got there with you, Maria was already dead. The story was starting to make sense, but it raised even more questions. Why didn't you call the police? I asked. Because Jennifer had made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would never let you go into the foster system. She was convinced that the man who was after her had connections everywhere, including in law enforcement and social services. She made me swear I would disappear with you and raise you as my own child. Michael reached across the table as if to touch my hand, then pulled back when he remembered where we were. Sarah, I know how this looks, and I know you must hate me now, but everything Linda and I did was to protect you. We created a new identity for you, moved to a different state, and built a life where you would be safe. We changed your name, your birth date, everything that could connect you to that night in Denver. But the DNA evidence, I said, how do you explain that? Michael's expression darkened. When I found Maria Santos' body, I panicked. She was crying in your car seat, and I didn't know what to do. I moved you into the apartment because I thought it would be safer than leaving you in the car, but I had to search for anything that might identify the men who had killed her. I thought if I could find evidence, I could help catch them and protect you better. His explanation made sense from a certain perspective, but it still left huge questions unanswered. Why didn't you tell me the truth when I got older? Why maintain the lie for so long? Because the danger never went away, Nico said, his voice urgent. Jennifer's killer was never caught, and we had no idea if he was still looking for you. Every year that passed, we thought maybe it was safe to tell you the truth. But then something would happen that reminded us how dangerous your real identity could be. Detective Morrison, who had been listening to the entire conversation, leaned forward. Michael, you said Jennifer was your sister. I'm Detective James Morrison from the Denver Police Department. Was Jennifer Morrison my daughter? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Michael looked between Detective Morrison and me, his face pale with the realization of what he had just revealed. Yes, he whispered. Jennifer Morrison was your daughter, James, which means Sarah is your granddaughter. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the recording equipment. Detective Morrison stared at me with an expression I couldn't read, while I tried to process the fact that the man who had been investigating my case for decades was actually my grandfather. My daughter Jennifer disappeared in 1987. Detective Morrison said slowly. She was 23 years old, and she had been dating a man we suspected was involved in criminal activities. When she vanished, we assumed she had either been killed or had gone into hiding. We never knew about the baby. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Sarah, I've been searching for my daughter for 36 years. I became a police detective because of her disappearance, and I've spent my entire career trying to find her. I never imagined that the cold case I was investigating would lead me to my own granddaughter. The emotional weight of the revelation was overwhelming. Not only had I discovered my true identity and age, but I had also found my grandfather, a man who had spent decades searching for his missing daughter and unknowingly for me. The connections were too complex and too tragic to fully comprehend. Michael continued his story, explaining how he and Linda had carefully constructed my false identity with the help of contacts who specialized in creating new lives for people in witness protection. They had chosen the name Sarah Chen and the birth year 1995 to make me seem younger and less likely to be connected to the events of 1987. We gave you Linda's maiden name, Chen, because it was common enough to help you blend in. And we moved to Portland because it was far enough from Denver and Sacramento to feel safe. We never intended to deceive you forever. But as the years went by, it became harder and harder to find the right time to tell you the truth. Detective Morrison had more questions about Jennifer's disappearance and the man she had been involved with. Michael provided what information he could, including a name, Vincent Carrera, a mid-level enforcer for a criminal organization that operated primarily in California and Nevada. Jennifer told me that Carrera had been physically abusive, and when she tried to leave him, he threatened to kill her and take the baby. She was convinced he had connections in law enforcement and that nowhere would be safe as long as he knew you existed. Detective Morrison immediately began making calls to track down information about Vincent Carrera. Within hours, he had disturbing news. Carrera had been arrested multiple times over the years for various violent crimes, but he had never been convicted due to witness intimidation and lack of evidence. More troubling, he was still alive and had been released from prison just 6 months earlier. Sarah, Detective Morrison said, if Carrera is still alive and if he's been in prison for the past several years, your DNA entering the genealogical database might have triggered attention from people who have been looking for you all this time. We need to consider the possibility that you're still in danger. Still in danger. After 36 years, the threat that had shaped my entire life might still be active. The realization was terrifying, but it also explained why Michael and Linda had maintained the deception for so long. They hadn't just been protecting a family secret. They had been protecting my life. Detective Morrison arranged for me to remain in protective custody while the FBI investigated Vincent Carrera's current activities and whereabouts. The investigation revealed that Carrera had indeed been monitoring genealogical databases through contacts on the outside, looking for any genetic matches that might lead him to Jennifer Morrison's missing child. The FBI's investigation uncovered a chilling truth. My DNA test hadn't just solved a cold case, it had potentially exposed me to the same people who had murdered my mother 36 years earlier. Carrera had been notified about the genetic match within days of my results being processed, and he had already begun making inquiries about my current identity and location. Sarah, FBI agent Rebecca Torres explained during a briefing, Vincent Carrera spent decades believing that Jennifer Morrison's child had died with her. When your DNA showed up in the system, it confirmed that you had survived and that you might have information about events from 1987 that could implicate him in multiple murders. The scope of the case was expanding beyond anything I could have imagined. Carrera wasn't just responsible for my mother's death, he was connected to a series of murders spanning multiple states and decades. The FBI had been building a case against him for years, but they had never had a surviving witness or genetic evidence strong enough to secure a conviction. Your DNA is the key to solving not just your mother's murder, but potentially a dozen other cases, Agent Torres continued. But it also makes you the most valuable witness in a case against one of the most dangerous criminals we've been tracking. The FBI offered me a choice: enter the witness protection program permanently or help them build a case against Carrera with the understanding that I would remain a target until he was captured and convicted. Both options meant giving up the life I had known, but one offered the possibility of justice for my mother and the other victims. I chose to help build the case. The decision wasn't easy, but I felt I owed it to my mother Jennifer, to Maria Santos, and to all the other victims to see that Carrera faced justice for his crimes. Detective Morrison, my grandfather, would be working closely with the FBI team, giving us a chance to build a relationship while also solving the case that had haunted him for decades. The investigation took months, during which I lived under federal protection while helping to piece together the events of 1987 and the years that followed. Through careful analysis of evidence and testimony from other witnesses who had been too afraid to come forward, the FBI built a comprehensive case against Vincent Carrera and several of his associates. The trial was intense and emotionally draining. I testified about the DNA evidence and the impact of learning my true identity, while other witnesses provided testimony about Carrera's pattern of violence and intimidation. Michael Chen also testified, explaining his actions on the night of Maria Santos's murder and his decision to hide my identity for so many years. Detective Morrison, my grandfather, provided decades of investigative work that helped establish the timeline and connections between multiple murder cases. His dedication to finding the truth about his daughter's disappearance had inadvertently laid the groundwork for solving a much larger criminal conspiracy. Vincent Carrera was ultimately convicted on multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and racketeering. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole, ending a reign of terror that had lasted for decades. Several of his associates were also convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. But the resolution of the case didn't automatically resolve the complex emotions and relationships that had been revealed. Michael and Linda Chen had protected me for 28 years, but they had also built my entire life on lies. Detective Morrison was my grandfather, but we were essentially strangers trying to build a relationship based on shared trauma and loss. Rebecca Martinez, who had initially contacted me through the genealogy website, turned out to be not my biological aunt, but a victim's advocate who had been helping families of Carrera's victims search for missing relatives. Her persistence in tracking me down had been motivated by her belief that someone connected to the 1987 murders had survived and might be able to provide crucial evidence. The most difficult part of the aftermath was deciding who I really was. Sarah Chen had been a lie, but it was also the identity I had lived with for 28 years. Isabella Morrison was my birth name, but it connected me to trauma and violence I had no memory of experiencing. I ultimately decided to legally change my name to Sarah Morrison, honoring both my adoptive identity and my biological heritage. My relationship with Michael and Linda Chen evolved slowly. While I couldn't forgive them for the deception, I came to understand that their actions had been motivated by love and a genuine desire to protect me. They had given up their own security and peace of mind to keep me safe, and they had succeeded in that goal, even if the cost had been tremendous for all of us. Detective Morrison and I began building a grandfather-granddaughter relationship, though it was complicated by the professional circumstances of our meeting. He shared stories about my mother, Jennifer, helping me understand the woman I had never had the chance to know. She had been artistic and compassionate, with a fierce determination to protect the people she loved, qualities that Detective Morrison said he could see in me. The genealogical company that had processed my DNA test implemented new security measures after learning how their database had been exploited by criminals. My case became part of ongoing discussions about the privacy and safety implications of genetic testing, particularly for people who might be in hiding from dangerous individuals. I also connected with other survivors of Vincent Carrera's crimes, forming a support network of people who had been impacted by his violence. Many of them had been living under false identities or in hiding for years, and my case gave them hope that they might finally be able to reclaim their real lives. The experience changed my perspective on identity and family in profound ways. I learned that genetics alone don't determine who you are, but they can provide crucial connections to understanding your history and place in the world. I also learned that family can be both biological and chosen, and that love and protection can take forms that aren't always easy to understand or accept. 3 years after that first DNA test, I work as a victim's advocate, helping other people who have discovered disturbing truths about their families or identities through genetic testing. My experience has given me unique insight into the complex emotions and practical challenges that arise when scientific discovery intersects with criminal activity and family secrets. I still live in protective custody to some extent, as there are concerns that other associates of Vincent Carrera might pose a threat, but I've been able to rebuild my life with a clearer understanding of who I am and where I come from. The 8 years that were stolen from my identity can never be recovered, but I've gained relationships and purpose that I never would have found if I hadn't decided to spit in that tube and mail it off to learn about my ancestry. Detective Morrison retired from the Denver Police Department, but continues to work on cold cases as a consultant. Our relationship has grown stronger over time, and he's become not just my grandfather, but also a mentor and friend. He often says that finding me was the greatest success of his career, even though it came at the end of decades of searching and heartbreak. Michael and Linda Chen moved to a smaller town in Oregon, where they live quietly and continue to process the complex emotions surrounding their role in my life. We speak regularly, and while our relationship will never be the same as it was before I learned the truth, we found a way to maintain the love and connection that sustained us for 28 years. The most important thing I've learned from this experience is that truth, no matter how painful or complex, is ultimately more powerful than deception. The lies that protected me as a child eventually put me in greater danger as an adult, while the truth, despite its immediate trauma, provided the foundation for justice and healing. Today, as I sit in my new apartment in Denver, just miles from where this nightmare began, 36 years ago, I can finally say that I know who I am. I am Sarah Morrison, daughter of Jennifer Morrison, granddaughter of Detective James Morrison, and survivor of one of the most complex criminal conspiracies of the 1980s. I am also the adopted daughter of Michael and Linda Chen, who loved me enough to sacrifice their own peace of mind to keep me safe. The DNA test that I thought would simply tell me about my ethnic heritage instead unraveled a web of murder, deception, and family secrets that spanned decades. It connected me to a grandfather I never knew existed, revealed the truth about my mother's brutal death, and ultimately brought justice to a serial killer who had evaded capture for over 30 years. But perhaps most importantly, it taught me that identity is not just about genetics or birth certificates or official documents. Identity is about the choices we make, the relationships we build, and the impact we have on the world around us. The 8 years that were stolen from my official age, the false name I carried for decades, the adoptive parents who built their lives around protecting me, all of these things are part of who I am, even if they weren't part of the original plan. Vincent Carrera died in prison 2 years after his conviction, taking with him the secrets of other crimes that may never be solved. But his death also meant that the threat that had shaped my entire life was finally definitively over. For the first time since I was 4 months old, I was truly safe. The genealogy company that processed my original DNA test now uses my case as a training example for their security protocols. They've implemented new safeguards to protect users whose genetic information might put them at risk, and they work closely with law enforcement to ensure that their databases aren't exploited by criminals. My story has been featured in documentaries and true crime podcasts, always with my permission and always with the goal of educating people about the potential consequences of genetic testing. I've received thousands of messages from people who have discovered their own family secrets through DNA tests, and I try to help them navigate the complex emotions and practical challenges that come with such revelations. Detective Morrison, my grandfather, often says that the case taught him that sometimes the most important investigations are the ones that find family instead of just finding criminals. Our relationship has become one of the most precious things in my life, a connection that exists because of tragedy, but has grown into something beautiful and sustaining. Michael and Linda Chen will always be my parents in the ways that matter most. They taught me right from wrong, supported my dreams, and showed me what unconditional love looks like. The circumstances that brought me into their family were extraordinary, but the family we built together was real and lasting. As I finish writing this account of my experience, I'm struck by how much can change from a single decision to seek out information about your past. That simple DNA test, prompted by nothing more than curiosity about my heritage, ultimately solved multiple murders, reunited me with family I didn't know existed, and brought justice to victims who had been waiting decades for someone to speak for them. I still receive occasional updates from the FBI about other cases that have been solved using genetic genealogy, and I'm always amazed by the power of DNA to reveal connections across time and distance. But I'm also more aware than ever of the responsibility that comes with genetic information and the importance of understanding that some discoveries can't be undone. If someone reading this is considering taking a DNA test, I want them to know that while my experience was extreme, it's not entirely unique. Genetic testing can reveal adoptions, infidelities, criminal connections, and family secrets that have been carefully hidden for generations. Most of the time, these revelations are manageable and even positive, but sometimes they can change everything about how you understand yourself and your place in the world. The question isn't whether you should take the test. That's a personal decision that only you can make. The question is whether you're prepared for the possibility that the answers you receive might not be the ones you expected, and whether you're ready to deal with the consequences of knowledge that can't be forgotten. For me, despite all the trauma and upheaval, I'm grateful that I took that test. It gave me the truth about my identity, justice for my mother's murder, and relationships that I treasure. It also gave me a sense of purpose in helping other people navigate similar discoveries and a deeper appreciation for the complexity of family and identity. The little girl who was found in a crib at a murder scene in 1987 grew up to be a woman who could help solve that murder and bring peace to the detective who had spent his career searching for answers. The DNA that connected me to a crime scene also connected me to a grandfather who had never stopped looking for his missing daughter and granddaughter. Sometimes, the most important discoveries are the ones we're not looking for. Sometimes, the answers we need are hidden in our own genetic code, waiting for the right technology and the right circumstances to reveal themselves. And sometimes, taking a simple test to learn about your ancestry can end up solving mysteries that have haunted families and law enforcement agencies for decades. My name is Sarah Morrison. I am 36 years old. I am the daughter of Jennifer Morrison, who was murdered when I was 4 months old. I am the granddaughter of Detective James Morrison, who spent 36 years searching for me. I am the adopted daughter of Michael and Linda Chen, who protected me with their lives and their love. And I am living proof that DNA doesn't just tell us where we come from. Sometimes it tells us who we really are and helps us understand our place in a story much larger and more complex than we ever imagined possible. The test results that once seemed like a simple curiosity have become the foundation of my identity, my purpose, and my understanding of justice. They've taught me that family extends far beyond genetics, that truth is more powerful than deception, and that sometimes the most important investigations are the ones that help us discover not just who committed a crime, but who we really are. That small tube of saliva I mailed off on a Tuesday morning in February didn't just reveal my ancestry, it revealed my destiny.